Oh, there we go. Great. So welcome everyone who's joined us right at noon. The number is going to keep ticking up, but we're going to start right on time. We will be recording this webinar. I will share that link back out with the treasurer's office so they can distribute it through their email channels. And then we will also send it back out to everyone who registered. So there shouldn't be anyone who doesn't have access to the webinar. I'm Martha Johnston. I'm the Director of Education at the Finance Authority of Maine. And I just want to say we're so pleased that the Treasurer reached out to us to partner in hosting this webinar today. So I will turn it over to Treasurer Beck to kick us off, and then we're going to jump right in because we got a ton of material to cover.
Thank you, Martha, very much. I am Henry Beck. I'm your state treasurer. This is a very important, sometimes confusing, sometimes stressful topic. But just by being here, you're taking the right approach. It's also, a federal issue. Student loan debt is a federal issue, but as Martha said, I asked the Finance Authority of Maine to put on this event for state employees in appreciation for your work and to learn about what is potentially a benefit for years of service. It's also a way for us to keep educated workers within state government. So all the information, the expert will be Betsy Mayotte. She's not here to sell you anything. She's not here to charge you money. She really is the #1 public service loan forgiveness expert in the country. She's led negotiations with federal regulators. She's presented internationally. She's in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. She's really a top change maker in personal finance. So she's also semi-local. She was raised in Lowell, Massachusetts, and resides in Plymouth, Mass. Now. We're very fortunate to have her expertise in our limited time. Betsy, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Treasurer Beck. I just want to commend your office for holding this webinar. I have been working in the student loan industry in a compliance or advocacy role for over 25 years. And my organization, the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, which we offer free student loan advice to all borrowers. What we have found is that the borrowers that are the most successful in managing their student debt, especially with public service loan forgiveness, are the ones that get some sort of additional support and education from their employers or from some of the associations around them. So you really are making an impact today by offering this webinar, and I thank you for recognizing that. I am going to turn my camera off because my face is going to add nothing to the rest of this presentation. I just want to add a little housekeeping. As I mentioned earlier, and it's worth mentioning again, we have a, excuse me, we have a very robust audience today, which I'm very excited about. It also means that there's going to be a lot of questions, which I'm also excited about. But to keep things manageable, and we've got some great experts working the Q&A panel, a couple ground rules with the questions. As we mentioned, if you have a question, you can post it in the Q&A panel that you can see either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on what type of system that you're using. To ensure that we answer as many questions as possible, we ask a couple things. First of all, hold off on your questions until I cover the topic. If I'm doing my job right, you're not going to have the question by the time I'm done. So, but you still might, or you might need further clarity. So if you still have a question after I've covered the topic, absolutely post it in the Q&A. I want to remind you the Q&A is public. This is not, you do not necessarily want your fellow Mainers knowing your business, so to speak. So if you have a very detailed or personal question, we suggest you actually don't post it at all. As I mentioned, the organization that I run, the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, we offer free student loan advice. We never, ever, ever charge consumers. So we suggest that you go to our website, which is freestudentloanadvice.org, and one of my fine feline friends will post that website for you. It's also at the end of this presentation. We've got a lot of plain English information on the site, and if you still have questions, you can go to the contact page and email us through the TISLA email. And with that housekeeping out of the way, I am going to dive right in. So here's the way the menu is going to go today. I'm going to start with a little bit of background because let's face it, as I mentioned, I've been in this industry since the earth cooled, And the past 3 years have been bananas when it comes to student loans. And I think it's helpful to people to understand a little bit why they've been bananas. So I'm going to do a little bit of the background there. Then I'm going to cover the Biden-Harris debt relief. I'm going to do a quick overview about how it works and then where it stands in the courts. Then we're going to cover what I think is one of the more important things that consumers need to know about right now, which is what's going on with the public service loan forgiveness and the not necessarily as well known income-driven plan waiver or one-time adjustment. If we have time, I'll give you a sneak peek at some upcoming changes to the rules, and we'll talk about some strategy on using these different programs and managing your student debt. Okay, let's talk background. The questions that tend to confuse the consumers that we work with the most are, why now for the waivers? Why are they only temporary, and are they at risk for reversal? So here what I'm talking about mostly is the public service loan forgiveness waiver, the income-driven plan adjustment. There's been some other not as widely known waivers, such as the Fresh Start program, which allows defaulted borrowers to get out of default pretty much immediately. There's been some waivers for people that are eligible for discharge of their loans due to disability, and a few more. The reason, so as everybody on this call is aware, here in the United States, we don't have a king. And the president of the United States, what that means is the president doesn't have outright authority over all the things. He can't just do, he or she, hopefully in the future, can't just do what they want. And what that means is that, yes, the president does have a power called executive order, but even an executive order, they are typically not allowed to do anything that's contrary to federal law. Congress is the one that sets the law. So, but there can be exceptions. And one of those exceptions is a piece of legislation that passed, I believe, back in 2003 called the HEROES Act. And part of the HEROES Act, excuse me, gives the president of the United States limited powers to do things that are contrary to federal statute. But that is only in cases of national emergency. So during COVID, we've been under national emergency. And this administration has taken advantage of that national emergency to do some things in a temporary way, because they only have that authority during the national emergency to make things a little bit easier for student loan borrowers and maybe right some wrongs that have happened in the past. And that speaks to specifically the public service loan forgiveness waiver and the income-driven plan one-time adjustment. It also answers the question is, why are these only temporary? I hear from a lot of borrowers saying, well, these waivers have been life-changing. Why aren't they permanent? And that's because the vast majority of what falls under these waivers is contrary to federal statute. So again, that's why we have a limited time period to be able to take advantage of these waivers and to enjoy the benefits from them. Are they at risk for reversal? At this point, the public service loan forgiveness waiver is said and done. The deadline for that was October 31st, although there is sort of a backdoor extension for a lot of it, as you'll see with the income-driven plan waiver. I suppose there's always a risk for reversal, but at this point, I feel like that risk is pretty low. If someone was going to sort of challenge the PSLF waiver, they would have done it a long time ago. And also, let's face it, it's not the optics for challenging the public service loan forgiveness waiver, which is viewed as something that helps firefighters and teachers and other first responders, is really not that great. I mean, it's sort of like the equivalent of getting caught kicking a puppy in the rain on TikTok. So again, I don't see that at risk for reversal. Same with the income-driven plan waiver. I think if someone was going to challenge it, we would have heard some chatter about that now. Of course, we have, as we'll see in a second, we have seen that what they're calling the Biden-Harris debt relief has been challenged, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So anyway, that's the why we're seeing all this stuff, why it's only temporary, and whether you need to worry about it in the future. All right, let's talk about the one-time student loan debt relief, also known as the Biden-Harris debt relief. Now, this is something that the President Biden that was part of his campaign was discussing forgiving federal student loan debt, and it's something that was he was reminded of often once he came into office. And finally, on August 24th of 2022, he made the announcement of his plan for student loan debt relief. Now, I found that the plan, in my opinion, was fairly thoughtful. There was never going to be support, or I should say broad support, for full student loan forgiveness. Because, of course, for most federal student loans, this is taxpayer money, and it does affect the budget. Even a lot of the Democrats don't agree that all student loans should be forgiven. I mean, this issue is a real political football, and it falls pretty clearly on party lines. But again, there's quite a few Democratic House members and senators that also don't think that student loans should all be forgiven. What was nice about this proposal, if you are a student loan nerd like myself and have read up on the data and studies, is it appears to focus on the borrowers that struggle the most. Believe it or not, if borrowers that owe less than $10,000 in student loan debt are much more likely to default than borrowers that owe six figures. And the reason for that is fairly simple. If you owe less than $10,000 in student loans, chances are it's because you have debt in no degree, that you had to withdraw from school before actually getting your degree for some reason. Whereas people that owe six figures in student debt, typically not only do they have their undergraduate degree, but they likely also have their graduate degree, and therefore find it easier often, again, not always, but often, to find employment and perhaps get a higher income, and therefore their debt tends to be more affordable, and they're, again, less likely to default. So I found that the proposal seems to focus on some of that data, which I found very thoughtful. Okay, so here's the eligibility components of the Biden-Harris debt relief. If you have a federal direct loan, and that means a Stafford loan, Graduate Plus, Parent Plus, or consolidation, doesn't matter when the loan was made. The very first direct loan was made in 1994. If you are the proud holder of a vintage 1994 federal direct loan, it is just as potentially eligible for this forgiveness as someone who took a loan out at the beginning of 2022. The only direct loans that aren't eligible for this debt relief are those where the first disbursement went out on or after June 30th of 2022. So it doesn't matter when the loan was approved. What matters is when the money first went to the school. And so, for example, for most people in a typical 2022-2023 September to May academic year, the first disbursement would not have gone to your school until at the earliest of August. So again, only loans with the first disbursement of the loan went out before June 30th of 2022 are eligible. The other loans that are eligible or potentially eligible for the debt relief are the other federal loans that are normally not held by the Department of Education, but there is a small portion that is. Those are Perkins loans and Federal Family Education Loan Program loans. Now, if you took your loans out prior to 2010, chances are very good, and you haven't consolidated since then, chances are very good that the loan is a FFEL loan and not a direct loan. And the vast majority of those, unfortunately, are not eligible for the debt relief. Ironically, unless they're in default. FFEL loans that are in default are potentially eligible for the debt relief. Now, for those of you thinking, well, I'm going to let my FFEL loans default so I get the forgiveness, that's a terrible idea. For one, you don't have enough time to default before the debt relief takes hold, assuming the Supreme Court blesses it. And number two, just frankly, it's not worth the credit hit. We're hoping that the Department of Education finds a way to loop in these FFEL loans, but at this point, unfortunately, the vast majority of them are not eligible for this debt relief. Now, if you're not sure if you have a direct loan or a FFEL loan, there's a really super easy way to figure out if your loan's eligible for this debt relief. Has it been due for payments? And does it currently have a 0% interest rate? If your loan has been eligible for the COVID pause, meaning you haven't been due for payment since March of 2020, and you've been enjoying a 0% interest rate, then it's potentially eligible for this debt relief. If you're still not sure, the simplest thing to do is to call your loan holder and ask if it's a loan that's eligible for the Biden-Harris debt relief. Now, the other component to the eligibility for the debt relief is income. What they're looking at is your adjusted gross income, so not your gross, essentially, for the most part, your take home. If you're a single person, if your AGI was no more than 125,000 for either the 2020 or the 2021 tax year, then you are potentially eligible for this debt relief. If you're married or if you are head of household, that amount jumps to an AGI of no more than 250,000. They are not looking at 2022. The chances of them changing that rule are slim to none. And I just want to reemphasize it's either 2020 or 2021. So if your AGI in 2020 was $14 million, but your AGI in 2021 was 124,000, then you are eligible for this debt relief. The only other carve out for this are for dependent students, and that's not dependent for tax purposes. That's dependent under the FAFSA rules, which are people that are undergraduate students and that are under 24 years of age. There's some other criteria for dependency, but for the most part, it's undergraduate students who are under 24 years of age. If you fall under that criteria and you were actually enrolled in school between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th of 2022, your qualifying income is actually not going to be your own, but they're going to base it off of your parents' income. Now, if you meet this criteria, everybody's eligible for up to $10,000 in forgiveness of their federal student loans. If you received a Pell Grant at any point in your academic career, then you're eligible for up to $20,000 in forgiveness. And when I say any point in your academic career, I mean it. So for example, let's say you have Parent Plus loans that you took out for your children, and back in the 80s, you got a Pell Grant for when you yourself were in college, then you're potentially eligible for that 20 grand. Here's another example. Let's say you have loans for undergrad, but you never, and you got a Pell Grant. I'm sorry. Let's say you didn't take any loans out for undergrad, but you did get a Pell Grant. But then you went to grad school and you took out loans. You're potentially eligible for the 20 grand. Now, to be clear, this is not a check you're going to get in the mail. They're going to apply this to your balance. And for the most part, they're going to apply it up to the balance. So let's say you're eligible for the 10 grand, but right now you only owe 7 grand. They're going to forgive the 7 grand and you're not going to get a refund. Again, and there are some exceptions to that, which I'll cover in a second. You are not going to get a refund of the additional $3,000. So they're going to, again, bring you to a zero balance, but you're not going to get a check for the difference in most cases. The last thing I want to mention about the eligibility for this is that it's a per borrower eligibility, not a per family eligibility. So let's look at the Duggars. There are 19 kids and counting. Hypothetically, let's say every one of those 19 kids took out student loans and they meet the income requirements. And Michelle and Jim also took out Parent Plus loans. And I can't imagine how much they would have in Parent Plus loans for 19 kids. And they all met the income requirements. They would all potentially get forgiveness under these requirements, either the 10 or the 20 grand, depending on whether each individual ever received a Pell Grant. All right, let's talk about refunds. I said what I mentioned in the prior slide is that for the most part, people aren't going to get a refund. That changes if you actually made payments during COVID on a COVID eligible loan. If you paid during COVID, and this is actually completely unrelated to the debt relief, whether you're eligible for the debt relief or not, you can always call and ask for a refund of those payments. So any payment made on a COVID eligible loan since March 13th of 2020, you can call at any time and ask for that money back. That includes if you paid the loan in full out of your pocket. You can ask for a refund of that money and have the balance be reinstated. Now, if let's say you didn't pay the loan off during COVID, but you did pay during COVID and you brought the loan down below the amount of forgiveness that you're going to get. In that scenario, they actually will automatically send you a refund once they apply the forgiveness. And I've got some case studies to sort of shine a clearer light on that in a second. If you paid the loan off during COVID, you actually have to call and ask for the refund, and you're going to want to do it before they apply the loan forgiveness. I would suggest if you're asking for a refund that just in case you park that money in an interest-bearing account, because we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. And if for some reason the Supreme Court were to strike down the debt relief, saying that President Biden didn't have the authority to do it, you are going to be due that money back. And once the COVID pause is over, it's going to start accruing interest. So I strongly suggest that if you do get a refund, you park it in an interest-bearing account until we find out what the Supreme Court is doing and until the forgiveness is applied to your account. Now, if you have a private student loan, meaning a loan that, let's say, was never a federal loan, private or state loans as well, those loans are not eligible for the debt relief and never can be eligible for the debt relief. If you have a federal loan that at some point you refinanced into a private loan, unfortunately, there's no take backsies. There was like about a 5-minute period of time where the Department of Ed was actually allowing borrowers to ask for refunds on those as well, but they shut the door on that pretty quickly. So again, unfortunately, you can't ask for a refund on a refinanced federal student loan, and those refinanced federal student loans are not eligible for the debt relief and never can be. Let me give you some examples about what I meant by the refunds. Let's talk about George. George has all direct loans, which are eligible for the COVID pause and therefore potentially eligible for this debt relief. When the pause began on March 13th of 2020, he owed $23,000. During the pause, he paid about $6,000, bringing his balance down to $17,000. Now, George received a Pell Grant at some point during his academic career, and he meets the income threshold, so he's eligible for $20,000 in debt relief. Once they apply that $20,000, he's automatically going to get a refund of $3,000. And the reason for that is because he paid during COVID, and it was those payments that brought his balance down below the $20,000 that he's eligible for in debt relief. Let's look at another example. This time, let's look at Zeke. Zeke and George have very similar profiles with one distinct difference. Zeke also has all direct loans, which are eligible for the COVID pause. And when the pause began on March 13th of 2020, he owed $17,000. Now, during the pause, he hasn't made any payments, so his balance is still $17,000. Zeke also received a Pell Grant and meets the income threshold, so he's eligible for the $20,000. Once they apply the forgiveness to his account will be zero, just like George's, but he's not going to get a refund. And that's because he didn't make any payments it wasn't due to any payments that he made during COVID that brought his balance down below what his forgiveness threshold was. Okay, so the application, which is currently on hold because of the court proceedings, they're going to open it back up as soon as assuming the Supreme Court blesses this. To find the application, it's at studentaid.gov. You don't have to search for it. Once they open it back up, it'll be the first thing that pops up when you go to studentaid.gov. It's one of the easiest applications that I've ever seen when it comes to federal student loans. You don't have to log in. You don't have to upload any information. You essentially are just providing your social security number and signing under penalty of perjury that the information that you're providing specifically about your income is true. In fact, there's about 8 million people that didn't have to apply at all. Those tend to be people that filled out the FAFSA in 2020 or 2021, or people that might have supplied their income information for an income-driven repayment plan during 2020 or 2021. Now, if you were one of those 8 million people, you would have received an email telling you that you didn't have to apply, but giving you the opportunity to opt out of the debt forgiveness if you wanted to. Now, why would you want to opt out? Well, there's a couple states, Maine I don't believe is one of them, that actually is still planning on taxing borrowers for this debt relief. And for some people that might be on some sort of income-related benefit, such as a housing benefit, they might have lost their housing benefit if this was included as income for them. Again, I don't believe that applies to the state of Maine, so that's not necessarily relevant for you, but people always ask me, why the heck would someone want to opt out of this? Well, there's why. Now, once they open the application back up, the deadline to apply is going to be December 31st of 2023. I do not anticipate them extending that deadline. It's not impossible, but I would not count on them extending that deadline. Again, the legal argument that the White House has hung their hat on for their authority to do this is mostly based on that HEROES Act. And that does have sort of deadlines around it. Now, before the courts put a pause on this, the Department of Ed expressed a goal to apply the forgiveness before repayments restarted. Now, back then, payments were due to restart around January. They've since extended it based on when we get the Supreme Court opinion. I'm going to talk about this more in a second. What we've heard is that the Supreme Court's going to issue their opinion sometime towards the end of June. So based on that, we expect payments to resume around August. Based on the goal of applying the forgiveness in the past, which was if people applied by last November, they were going to have it done before payments restarted in January. You're looking at about a 6-week time frame. I don't see any reason why that 6-week time frame would change. But they of course are not going to make a commitment on how long it's going to take. I still anticipate that they will work hard to apply forgiveness to people that have to apply the actual forgiveness amount to the people that have already applied to their accounts before repayments restart, again, assuming in August. Now, once you do apply, again, if you haven't yet, don't fret. They will reopen the applications once we get the Supreme Court opinion. You're going to get an email confirming that they've received your application. After that, unfortunately, it's a communication black hole. There's no place to go check where you stand in line. There's no place, and there isn't going to be a place for you to check, the only place to check if they've applied your forgiveness is to look at your loan balance on your servicer's account. Your servicer is not going to be able to tell you when it's going to be applied. Unfortunately, what you're going to have to do is put your patience pants on. That's a phrase I like to use. Put your patience pants on and tighten your belt. And know that the average time frame is about 6 weeks, but for some people it could very well be a lot longer than that. And again, there's no place, there isn't going to be a place to check on it, and there isn't going to be a person on the planet that includes your member of Congress or the Secretary of Education or even your friendly neighborhood Betsy over at Tisla that's going to be able to push your account further up in line over ahead of everybody else. So again, it's going to be a waiting and a patience game. Now, as I mentioned, the application's super simple and you're not required to provide any information for the most part, but they are aware that unfortunately there's always a bad apple in the bunch that might try to fib a little bit on their income when they fill out the application. And to avoid instances of fraud, the Department of Education has stated that they've built in some AI and other things into the programming for this forgiveness program to try to identify accounts that it may not actually be truthful that they meet the income threshold. And then in addition to that, to try to protect taxpayer funds, they're also going to be doing some random verification processes. So what they've said is there's going to be about 5 million people that will receive a request for income verification. If you get that request, you will be required to submit proof of income in order to receive the relief. And if you don't do that by March 31st of 2024, then you're not going to be eligible for the debt relief. And that's a hard stop. There isn't going to be any type of appeal for that. If you are someone that is requested to provide verification information, it's super simple. You're either going to provide your tax return from either 2020 or 2021, whichever year is the one that makes you eligible, or your tax transcript, or if you weren't required to file taxes, then you can get a letter at irs.gov verifying that, where the IRS verifies for you that you were not required to file taxes. Question we get a lot about this debt relief is, do you as the borrower have any control over how the debt relief is applied? The answer is no, but that's not a bad thing because I think for the most part, borrowers are going to be really happy. The way the Department of Ed's going to apply it is the way you would have applied it. So first, they're going to see if you have any defaulted loans. If you do, they're going to apply the debt relief to that first. After that, they're going to look for the loan with the highest interest rate. If it so happens that all your loans have the same interest rate, they're going to apply it to unsubsidized loans first. and then subsidized loans. And then they're going to, and if all of those things are all the same, they're going to apply it to the loan with the lowest balance first to try to pay it off. Once they apply the debt relief, they're going to what's called re-amortize your loan balance, which means that unless you're on some sort of a plan that's based on your income, you should expect your monthly payment amount to go down once they apply this debt relief. If your payment is based on your income, then your payment should not change as a result of this debt relief. Now, the amount that's forgiven, as I mentioned, is not going to be taxed on the federal level. It's also not taxed in Massachusetts. Last I heard, there's only 4 states, and none of them are in Red Sox Nation that are planning on taxing this debt relief. Okay, here's the latest on the lawsuits. We're sort of pressed for time, so I can't go into the whole story about it. Some people find it fascinating. Some people are going to be really grateful that I don't have time to go into all the gory detail. But the short version is that, as expected, as soon as the debt relief was announced, we started getting lawsuits. Now, people can sue for anything, but they usually don't make it. The lawsuits don't make it very far unless the plaintiff has what we call standing. Standing means you can't just sue because you don't like something. You have to prove that you've been harmed. Now, let me just preface this by saying I'm not an attorney. And so I'm just sort of giving your lady on the street opinion on this. The vast majority of the lawsuits had no standing, and the courts, the various courts took care of them fairly quickly. There was a couple where the particular courts where the lawsuits were filed did find that the plaintiffs potentially had standing. I don't necessarily agree with that, and there's some other attorneys that also don't necessarily agree with that, but we're not the judges in those courts. So the White House finally got to the point where they said enough, and these lawsuits were delaying the debt relief and delaying the Department of Education's ability to apply the debt relief. So in the interest of not stringing consumers along on this, the White House finally said enough. And the White House actually asked the Supreme Court to look at these lawsuits, and they also asked the Supreme Court to do it sooner rather than later. Now, there's some borrowers, we've heard from some consumers that said, oh God, why is this taking so long? If you're familiar at all with Supreme Court cases, this is happening super fast, like crazy fast. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear arguments on this case at the end of February, beginning of March in the Supreme Court calendar. And they've agreed to issue their opinion by the end of June. So again, crazy, crazy fast for a Supreme Court case. And in the meantime, all we can do is sort of wait and bite our nails a bit. Now, I also get asked a lot, what do I think is going to happen? So again, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a constitutional scholar. I read the Department of Education's legal opinion on it. Sounded good to me. I'm an optimist, so I feel like the Supreme Court may bless it. Now, with that said, I have talked to people that are attorneys that are a lot smarter than me, and it really falls down the middle. I have just as many people saying there's no way the Supreme Court's going to bless this as people saying absolutely, this is absolutely going to go through, which is not helpful to anybody who's trying to plan ahead on this. So again, we just have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So that's what I had for us on the overall debt relief. Pat, is there anything that you think, did you get any questions that you think I should cover verbally for the whole group?
Yes, so there is confusion about emails that people received after having applied for the forgiveness plan.
I know where you're going. Are you talking about the broad emails the department sent out to reminding people to apply that they sent to everybody, even if they'd already applied?
Yes.
Yeah, don't worry about them. If you applied and you got an email, I got an email and I, again, I'm older than dirt. I paid off my student loans a long time ago and I got one of those emails. They're just trying to do outreach. Don't fret. If you submitted an application and received an email confirming that the application was received, and if you didn't get one, by the way, check your spam folder. then you're fine. Don't worry about it. Again, they're just doing outreach. What about my FAME family? Did you guys see any questions you thought might be good for the whole group?
Hey Betsy, Martha here. We did get one question about whether or not the state would be offering this debt relief in the event that the Biden-Harris relief did not go through the Supreme Courts. So I just wanted to let people know, if you go to faymaine.com, we have certain student loan repayment programs in exchange for certain professions. For instance, if you work as a healthcare provider or a dentist in an underserved area. But right now, I am not aware of any proposals for the state to pick up where this proposal leaves off in the event that the Supreme Court doesn't allow it to go through.
Yeah, I agree with that. I haven't heard of any state that has said, I mean, this would be, state budgets are struggling across the country. I would be very surprised if any state were to offer a replacement if this were to not go through the Supreme Court. But I'm super glad you mentioned those state forgiveness programs. We actually have a database on our website of all the forgiveness programs that we're aware of. And there's over 100 of them. I think last I checked, there was over 120 of them. A lot of them are state-based, not all of them though. So if you go to our website, hopefully we have all the main ones there as well. We update that usually about twice a year.
Betsy,
Okay.
Betsy, just real quick, this is Mary. Just a few questions about, should I be making payments during the pause? One was specific to those who are PSLF eligible, wanting to just confirm we should not be making payments. But then beyond that, for those that aren't eligible, just real quick on what should borrowers be doing during the repayment pause, whether they're PSLF eligible or not?
Well, I'm sort of covering that in a few minutes.
Okay, all right, great.
But if you're not eligible, if the Biden-Harris debt relief would bring your balance to zero, my advice to you would be pretending to pay, but pay yourself into an interest-bearing account. And then if it doesn't go through, in fact, that's my advice to everybody, whether the debt relief is going to bring their account to zero or not. Pretend to pay, but pay into an interest-bearing account. And then if the Supreme Court strikes it down, and or when payments resume, probably in August, make a lump sum payment. This is again assuming your loan is eligible for COVID in the first place and has a 0% interest. If you're pursuing PSLF, you should not be paying during COVID. In fact, you should be asking for a refund. And for some borrowers that are pursuing income-driven plans or that'll benefit from this waiver that I'm about to talk about, you also shouldn't be paying. And paying is actually a waste of money. Okay, I'm going to dive into the waivers. So unfortunately, we're pressed for time today, so I don't have time to go into all the nuts and bolts of the normal public service loan forgiveness rules. I am going to do a 10,000-foot level on the normal public service loan forgiveness rules because it's important you know this if you're pursuing PSLF, because unless you're going to get immediate forgiveness under these waivers, you're going to have to follow these rules once the COVID pause has lifted. So PSLF gets sort of a bad rap of being overly complicated, but if you take a step back and look at it from the 10,000-foot level, it actually isn't. So if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, this is the slide I want you to remember in relation to PSLF. Under normal traditional PSLF rules, in order to get your balance forgiven under public service loan forgiveness, you're required to make 120 eligible payments on an eligible loan while working for an eligible employer. The key here is that all three of these things have to happen at exactly the same time. So for example, if you could be making an eligible payment on an eligible loan, but if you weren't working for an eligible employer at the time, that payment is never going to count for PSLF. Now, you can mix and match these three things. You could be working for an eligible employer and making payments on an eligible loan, but if you're not making what's considered an eligible payment, it's not going to count for PSLF under normal rules. So again, after all these waivers are over and the COVID pause is over and you're still pursuing your PSLF, if you have a question about it, if you take a step back and remember this slide, 80% of the time you're going to be able to answer the question you have just based on this slide. Now, for the rest of it, we have a really extensive write-up on our website. The link is below. If you go to our website, freestudentloanadvice.org, click on loan forgiveness and then PSLF. I'd like to think it's in plain English. We also have a Q&A about the various waivers there. And then if you still have a question beyond that, of course, you can always email us. Everything that we do for consumers is free. It's always free. You're not even required to create a login. Just quick, really quick, defining all those eligibles. What's an eligible loan? What's an eligible payment? What's eligible employment? An eligible loan is any federal direct loan, whether it be a Stafford loan, Graduate Plus, Parent Plus, or a consolidation loan. Doesn't matter when the loan was made. If you have a federal direct loan, it's eligible for PSLF. Now, other federal loans, including FEL, Perkins, if you have an old federal nursing loan or an old HEAL loan, those can be made eligible for PSLF by consolidating them into the direct loan program, which you would do at studentaid.gov. Now, typically, outside of the waiver, when you consolidate your loan, it resets your PSLF count to 0. As you'll see in a minute, during these waivers, that doesn't happen, but there's a deadline to take advantage of that. Now, normal PSLF rules, an eligible payment is one that's made on time under either a 10-year standard plan or any of the income-driven repayment plans. An eligible payment is one that's made on a direct loan while working eligible employment that's made after 10/107, because that's when PSLF was created, was put into law. As I mentioned, under normal PSLF rules, pre-consolidation payments can't be counted, and payments made while you're in default never count. Eligible employment for PSLF. One of the big myths for PSLF is that it matters what you do for a living. It does not matter what you do for a living. What matters is who you work for. And if you're here because you work for the state of Maine, you are working for an eligible employer. Any government employer is a PSLF eligible employer, whether that be federal, state, local, or tribal. Any 501c3 nonprofit is a PSLF eligible employer. And there are some other nonprofits that are also potentially eligible in a very limited way, only if their primary reason for being is one of a finite list of things, such as public library services, public health, public education, and so on. You can find that list and a more extensive explanation, again, on our website on the PSLF page or on the Department of Education's website of studentaid.gov. I just want to reemphasize that it does not matter what you do for a living. The example I like to use is the Boston Public School System. If you work for the Boston Public School System, you're working for the city of Boston, and a city is a government employer and therefore PSLF eligible. In our experience, if you talk to a teacher in the Boston Public School System that has student loans, they know about PSLF and they know that they're potentially eligible. What we also find is if you talk to anybody else in the Boston Public School System, whether it be the cafeteria workers or the custodians or the principal or the administrative assistants, they tend not to realize that they're just as potentially eligible for PSLF as the teachers are. Because again, it doesn't matter what you do. What matters is who you work for. Now, previously, you needed to be full-time as defined by your employer. Thanks to a new rule that was announced on November 1st of 2022, and that they're doing early implementation for, excuse me, now you only have to be, as long as you're working at least 30 hours a week, excuse me, whether it be for a single employer or multiple employers, as long as you're working at least 30 hours a week, then for one of these eligible employers, then you are meeting the eligible employment definition for PSLF. We talked about this a little bit already, but under the COVID waivers, so if you're pursuing PSLF and you're fairly confident that you're going to end up getting forgiveness and you've been paying during COVID, stop it. The COVID months, assuming that you're working eligible employment at the time, are PSLF eligible months. Paying will not get you PSLF any quicker. There is never a situation where you can get credit for more than 1 month of PSLF credits per month. So if you've been paying during COVID, not only do I want you to quit it, as soon as you get off this webinar, I want you to call your loan servicer and ask for a refund for any payments you've made since March 13th of 2020, and they will happily give it to you. Well, they'll happily process it. It's actually the U.S. Treasury that issues the refunds. The average time frame, what I'm hearing, for Treasury to issue those refunds is around 150 days. But I can't emphasize it enough. If you're pursuing PSLF and you've been paying during COVID, it's the equivalent of taking that money out of your ATM machine and putting it in your backyard fire pit and lighting it on fire and toasting marshmallows over it. It truly is throwing money away. All right, let's talk about this PSL, the income-driven plan waiver. Now, there was a public service loan forgiveness waiver that ended, and essentially what that did is it was sort of a Hail Mary, and it gave people credit for any month that they were working eligible public service, regardless of what payment plan they were on, regardless if the payment was late, even if the payments were made on a FEL loan or if the payments were made on a Perkins loan. That ended on October 31st. And they were saying that people had to apply by October 31st in order to get credit under that waiver. Well, thanks to this income-driven plan adjustment that I'm about to talk about, most of, but not all, of the PSLF waiver has sort of gotten a backdoor extension. Now, the only two things that were under the PSLF waiver that are not extended, so the door to these two things are closed forever. Under the PSLF waiver, there's another forgiveness program called teacher loan forgiveness, and normally under the law, you can't double dip. So for a teacher loan forgiveness, you can get up to $17,500 forgiven on your eligible federal student loans if you work 5 consecutive years for a low-income school. Now, under normal PSLF rules, you can't use that teacher loan forgiveness and then use the same 5 years towards the 10 years you need for public service loan forgiveness. Under the PSLF waiver, they let you double dip. That ship has sailed. If you didn't already raise your hand and submit your PSLF paperwork by October 31st, you lost the opportunity to double dip for teacher loan forgiveness. The other thing that's expired is the rules require that you not only be working for an eligible employer at the time you make every one of those 120 payments, but it also requires you be working for an eligible employer at the time you apply for and get approved for forgiveness. That piece was also waived as part of the PSLF waiver, and that door is also shut. So unless you hit 120 by October 31st of 2022, you will still need to be working for a PSLF eligible employer at the time that you hit 120 and actually apply for and receive the forgiveness. But everything else under the PSLF waiver is effectively extended under this income-driven plan waiver. So here's what the income-driven plan waiver does. Actually, let me back up a little bit. Before I tell you what the income-driven plan waiver does, I want to do a quick overview of the income-driven plans. There are about 5 or 6 of them. They're all exactly the same except where they're different. Here's what they have in common. Under the income-driven plans, your payments are based on income and family size, and you're required to resubmit your proof of income, and therefore your payment adjusts on an annual basis. The other thing all these income-driven plans have in common is they have a forgiveness component baked into them. Depending on the plan and depending on what kind of loans you have, if you're on an income-driven plan for 20 or 25 years, meaning you've been recertifying your income every year for 20 or 25 years, they will forgive any balance that's left over after that time period. Under normal rules, again, consolidation resets your forgiveness count. Now, the income-driven plans are as follows. There's an old IBR. It still exists. We call it old IBR. There's new IBR, which exists, but it's a little newer. There's a plan called Pay As You Earn. There's one called Revised Pay As You Earn, which is actually about to be revised, so we should be calling it Revised Pay As You Earn. And then there's one called Income Contingent Repayment. all of those follow the rules you see that I've already covered. Again, payments based on income or family size, you have to apply annually, and they have a forgiveness component baked in after either 20 or 25 years. Now, under this income-driven plan waiver, which is going to apply to any federally held federal student loan. So that means all direct loans and those couple Fell or Perkins loans that might already be serviced by the Department of Education directly. And it also includes loans, Fell loans or Perkins loans that you consolidate by May 1st of 2023. And so that's any Stafford loan, any Graduate Plus, any Parent Plus, or any consolidated Fell or Perkins loan, as long as it's consolidated by May 1st of 2023. Essentially, if your loan's eligible for the COVID pause, it's going to be eligible for this one-time adjustment. And what the one-time adjustment is going to do is it's essentially sort of a Hail Mary and then some, to be quite honest with you. They're going to, when they do this adjustment, they're going to give your loans credit for every month that it's ever been in repayment towards the 20 or 25 years you need for loan forgiveness, even if you weren't on an actual income-driven plan. The only exceptions to months they're not going to count are periods of default, and that's it. So it doesn't matter if you made the payment under a Fell loan or a Perkins loan or prior to a consolidation. Doesn't matter if it was made on a standard repayment plan, a graduated repayment plan, an extended repayment plan, or any of the income-driven plans. They're going to give you credit for it towards the income-driven repayment plan, the 20 or 25 years needed for the income-driven plan forgiveness. And if you were working eligible public service at the time, it's also going to count, including for Parent Plus loans, towards public service loan forgiveness. Again, as long as it wasn't prior to October 1st of 2007. That's a cutoff for PSLF only. They're even going to count some periods of deferment or forbearance, but again, that won't be counted until they actually do the one-time income-driven plan adjustment, which for most people is not going to be until at the earliest this summer. The Department of Ed has said they're going to start in July. I've heard some chatter that it actually might be later than that. But they're going to try to do those adjustments starting this summer. It's what's unclear is how far back they're going to go. The very first income-driven plan, which is income contingent repayment, didn't exist till 94. And quite frankly, very few people used it back then. The first income-driven plan that has gotten any type of real usage is old IBR, and that wasn't available until 2009. The income-driven plans that get used the most weren't in place till 2012 or 2015. They haven't said how far back they're going to go. So it's possible that they're going to go back till the dawn of student loans, which means for people that have been paying on their loans for 20 or 25 years, they could see immediate, even if they've never been on an income-driven plan before, once they do this one-time adjustment, they could see immediate forgiveness. The other benefit that was part of the PSLF waiver that they're extending under this income-driven plan waiver is that if you consolidate before May 1st and your underlying loans had different repayment periods, that consolidation loan is going to get credit for the highest possible count. So for example, let's say you went to undergrad, took out loans, then left school for a while, and then after a couple of years, you went to grad school and took out loans. And today, your undergrad loans, you've made 50 months worth of payments on, and your graduate loans, you've made 20 months worth of payments on. If you consolidate those loans by May 1st, once they do the income-driven plan adjustment, that consolidation loan will get credit for 50. And now, if you're pursuing PSLF and you were working eligible employment for all 50 of those months, you'll also get PSLF credit for 50. Now, I can't emphasize enough. If you don't if you have different counts or you have Fell or Perkins loans, you must consolidate by May 1st. Otherwise, you're not going to be eligible for any of these benefits that I mentioned. If you have all direct loans and they've all been in repayment for the same time, you have no need to consolidate. We covered all of this. Oh, if after they do the one-time account adjustment, it turns out that you've made more than the 20 or 25 years needed for income-driven plan forgiveness, or in the case of PSLF, more than the 120 payments needed for public service loan forgiveness, assuming those extra payments were made after post-consolidation and not pre-consolidation, they're going to automatically send you a refund. Now, if you never consolidated and you made more than enough payments, they'll automatically do the refund. But let's say you consolidated May 1st and didn't make any payments after that because of COVID. And when they did the adjustment, they figured out you'd hit either the 10-year or the 20-year mark or more. You would not get a refund in that case because, again, they don't refund pre-consolidation payments. Just to reiterate, because people always have a lot of questions about this and it causes some confusion, up until May 1st, consolidation will not reset your public service loan forgiveness or your income-driven plan count. Now, just so you don't freak out, when you first consolidate, it's going to show that you have a zero count, and it's going to keep showing zero until they do the income-driven plan adjustment. And again, that might not be till the fall. So again, patience pants, and don't fret about it. It's actually written on the Department of Education's website that they will count any pre-consolidation payments. If your loans have different counts, the consolidation will be assigned the higher count. And if you consolidated more than once, they're going to do a look back of all pre-consolidation payments. Now, there are a few borrowers that actually are seeing the IDR adjustment now. What I'm told is they're only doing that for borrowers that might end up getting PSLF forgiveness right away as a result of the IDR adjustment. The vast majority of borrowers, so like 95 or 98% of borrowers, will not see the IDR adjustment prior to this fall. And there's nothing you could do to get them to do it earlier. Oh, and one last thing. There's no application for the IDR adjustment. It's just going to happen on eligible loans. Once they get started on it, they're just going to do it. Now, another common question we get is, can borrowers pursue all three programs at the same time, meaning the Biden-Harris debt relief, the IDR waiver, and the PSLF waiver? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. There's, one does not disqualify you from the other. The only exception to that is FEL borrowers. If they consolidate, if they consolidate, it precludes them from getting the Biden-Harris debt relief. But as of right now, FEL loans aren't eligible for that anyway, and we don't know for sure if the Department of Ed's going to find a way to loop those in. So you're going to have to take your chances on that. And I want to remind people, people get caught up in the word loan forgiveness, but the name of the game isn't forgiveness. The name of the game is paying the least amount over time. And for some people, with the exception of the debt relief, pursuing an income-driven plan forgiveness or even PSLF forgiveness could actually cost you more out of pocket. If your income is around the same as your loan balance or higher, chances are you're going to pay less out of pocket by actually paying your loans off aggressively than by making the lowest payment possible and pursuing loan forgiveness. All right, we're at 1 o'clock. So I want to stop and ask for questions. I am going to be, the other stuff was just sort of extra if we have time. It's stuff that's coming up in the future, and I'm happy to talk about it. But for those people that have to get off sooner rather than later, I want to make sure we have time to address the common questions. Pat, we'll start with you. Is there anything you think I need to cover with the group?
I think the biggest thing is to tell people how to contact us directly, because we're only getting a few of the questions answered. There's so many, Betsy. And
Okay.
a lot of people are asking very specific, personal questions. And another thing they're not realizing is they do follow-up questions, and we don't know what the question was when they do a follow-up because there's so many intervening questions.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll put the slide up again at the end of the presentation, but our website is freestudentloanadvice.org. If you're like me, I'm a visual learner rather than an auditory learner. So I strongly urge you to check out our public service loan forgiveness and our income driven plan pages on our website. We have really extensive FAQ documents linked on those pages. So I strongly urge you to check those out. And then if you still have questions, go to the contact page and you'll see the TISLA email. Do send it to the Betsy email, or it might get lost in the day-to-day business. The TISLA email is where we answer consumer questions for free. We try to answer questions within a business day, and 95% of the time we do. I have a feeling it's going to be a busy couple days, so you might take us a little bit of extra time. But again, freestudentloanadvice.org. Go to the loan forgiveness and repayment pages, and then if needed, go to the repayment page. Treasurer Beck, I see you put your camera back on. Did you want to make a comment or before we?
No, thank you, Betsy, very much for your
Okay.
time.
Fame family, did you come across any questions you think would be good for the whole group to hear?
Hey, Betsy, it's Martha here. So we have been answering questions fast and furious, but like Pat said, there could be some that we haven't quite got. We are going to try to convert these into a Q&A transcript so that we get as many addressed as possible. It will be completely anonymous and then sent back out to all the registrants. Many of you have been emailing me anyway, even before the webinar started. So, Betsy's our expert. Feel free to email TISLA, but also really do feel free to email me, mjohnston, JOHNSTON @famemaine.com. And I will do my best along with the staff to help you. And then we always turn to Betsy too via email if there's something that goes beyond our skill set. But I just want you to realize you've got another resource with us as well.
Great. All right. For those who feel like hanging out, I'm going to take another 5 minutes and just talk to you about what's coming. There was last year, there was a negotiated rulemaking session, which is what the Department of Education uses to change federal regulation. Now they're not allowed to change federal law. But they made a lot of really beneficial changes, especially to public service loan forgiveness. We already talked about one of them, which is that they changed the definition of full-time, that you only have to be working 30 hours a week, regardless of whether your employer considers you full-time or not. That's effective pretty much now. The rest of this won't be effective until July 1st of this year. One of them is that it won't matter if your payment is late. Now, we encourage you not to be late because that can negatively affect your credit. But if you have a late payment, they'll still count it for PSLF as long as you meet the other requirements starting July 1st. They also, and this already existed, but now they've codified it. They've actually put it into regulation that in a limited way, lump sum payments will also count, whereas before they did not. They also made a great change for adjunct professors who in the past have sort of gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to public service loan forgiveness. They've created a formula where they'll look at how many credits that the adjunct professors have been teaching. And for every credit that you're teaching, they multiply that by, I believe it's 3.35 hours. And as long as that adds up to 30 hours a week or more, they will count that for PSLF. They're also going to start, assuming that you're working full-time for an eligible employer, starting July 1st of 2023, they're going to count periods of economic hardship deferment, military deferment, and cancer treatment deferment. Now, those are already going to be effectively looped in as part of the income-driven plan waiver as well. So essentially, if you ever in the past were under economic hardship deferment, military deferment, or cancer treatment deferment, and you were working full-time for an eligible employer, that's going to end up getting counted as well. But future, it will always get counted starting July 1st of 2023. They also made a really great change where they eliminated every single instance where interest could capitalize or be added to your balance, that they could. There's 2 instances that they couldn't remove it because it's in federal law. And that's going to be when you first leave school. If you have unsubsidized loans and haven't paid the interest, it will still be capitalized. And if you're on the pay-as-you-earn program and leave that program, your interest will capitalize. Normally, interest accrues in its own little field, And that will still happen. This doesn't mean interest is going to stop accruing. It just means the number of instances where it can be added to your principal and you'd essentially be getting charged interest off of interest, for the most part, is going to be going away effective July 1st. They also made some beneficial changes for borrowers that are pursuing discharge due to permanent disability because their school closed while they were attending or because their school defrauded them. And once those changes are effective, we will be adding them to the language for those changes on our website as well. So just as a reminder, your resources, studentaid.gov is the Department of Ed website. Of course, our website, freestudentloanadvice.org. Excuse me, and I've included the link to the announcement about the Biden-Harris debt relief as well as the income-driven plan one-time adjustment. And with that said, I want to thank the Treasurer's Office as well as FAME for having me. I love talking about student loans. I could talk about it all day, every day, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that without seeing people roll their eyes at me. And that's it. That's what I've got for you today.